You're listening to Toronto's #1 real estate podcast, powered by Watson Estates. The most successful local real estate investing starts right here, right now. Here's your host, broker, investor, and social media influencer, Bradley Watson.
Good morning, investors, and happy Victoria Day. I hope you guys are having a fabulous weekend. And here we are, bright and early Monday morning on Toronto's #1 real estate podcast. We are #1 on Google Podcasts for Toronto real estate. All thanks to you, our listeners. Our numbers are growing. The word is out. Everyone is becoming more and more informed about what's going on in our real estate market, including myself, having the opportunity on a daily basis to meet with you guys and chat about some of the news coming out in our ever-changing real estate market here in Toronto. We got some good stuff for you today. I want to start off talking about, is the market rebounding in the eyes of real estate brokerages? This is going to be kind of a cool segment because it's going to allow me to share with you what I'm seeing out of my industry in the brokerage, as well as what I'm hearing from other columnists and people, just kind of getting a feel, a lay of the land from realtors. It's a different perspective, a little bit less news, but really kind of on the ground. And then I want to transition and actually definitely go into the news and talk about what has happened on, we finally have stats on the May 1st rent collection and how many people have paid rent in May. And I think the numbers are going to surprise you. They sure as hell surprised me. And then I want to talk about, will Toronto reverse its property tax hike? There's a very interesting column that came out discussing the possibility of removing the property tax in Toronto. We've touched on this in the past, and so I want to revisit this because it sounds like Mr. Tory is getting a bit of flack now. So I want to clear the air on what kind of pickle is he in. And before we kind of get started, some highlights from this weekend, some big stuff going on. Of course, there was a crazy rainstorm that hit our house, and I'm so glad to live in a home and have a roof over our heads. And actually on Saturday, I don't know if you guys heard, you're allowed now to have drive-in churches in Ontario, which is going to make for a very interesting Thursday night with our youth. As well, in sadder news, actually one of the snowbirds, I don't know if you guys saw the footage, over Kamloops, BC, crashed, and from what I can hear, there was actually a death that happened by one of the snowbirds. So what a world we live in. And I'm hoping that today, this Victoria Day, the long weekend, gives you that extra day off. And hopefully this is helping you guys as much as it's helping me and my family. And again, I'm so glad you guys are here. Let's jump right into some of the crazy stuff going on in our marketplace. I'm going to try and fill you guys in, but obviously I can't teach you everything in one sitting. I hope you guys are following us on a daily basis. This is us learning. And so I want to share, though, what's going on in my life and the conversations that I have around me. So I'm going to start off with this. This isn't something that came out necessarily organically. It did. It just so all stars seemed to line up. But about a week and a half ago, I was very suspicious. And if you guys have been following my podcast, you'll know that things seem to be picking up. But the problem is there's no numbers. Like, there's no stats this month. There's stats from last month. But that last month is a long time ago. I mean, at least in this marketplace. And so I'm suspicious that showings must be picking up because I'm seeing a ton of competition out here. So I sent an email to my front desk just to say, hey guys, you're the ones booking the appointments. Are you seeing more showings? And their response was kind of disappointing. They said, oh, well, in the last couple of weeks, we haven't had a lot of showings. That's what they said. I'm like, oh, damn it. Okay, maybe I'm a total fool. But then on Friday, I forgot to mention this on our podcast on Friday, but I received an email from someone in our in our management team, and they said this: I'm happy to report that the market is picking up and the number of appointments booked have now reached January 2020 levels. Well, remember, this is the winter market, but interesting that they've made a point of sending this out. We can see a drastic decline starting in mid-March. After 6 weeks of record low activity, I am happy to report that in the last 2 weeks, the number of showings have been steadily increasing. The market is picking up. Man, I almost fell off my chair when I saw that because I was literally asking the question, and obviously it was the right question. I just didn't get the right answer until a week or so later. But there you have it, guys. Like, that came out of my office. So that means that out of my office, our office, by the way, is out of Streetsville, Mississauga. Our whole office knows that, and they're tracking. And if we're seeing increasing in our appointments. We have hundreds of listings. And so that tells me that news, whether it's being sent out or not to realtors, that's the news, guys. That's what we're going to see when you pick up your newspaper. Who the hell does that anymore? But if you were to, hypothetically pick up your newspaper at the beginning of next month and you see the stats, that's going to be the news. So that now you guys know you're 2 weeks ahead of the crowd. You're welcome. But then I also saw an article that came out of Toronto Sun that points another picture, right? Like, all I'm doing here, guys, in this podcast is I'm compiling information. I'm creating my own thinking here too. We're looking and we're kind of chewing on this together. So this came out of the actual article. This is a columnist. Usually columnists come out on weekends, by the way. That's what I'm starting to kind of pick up, doing this on an ongoing basis with you guys. Lackey, that's the author. Toronto housing market chugging right along. Now, this person's actually a realtor, a second-generation realtor. So the article reads, with so much uncertainty around what's to come, there continues to be a lot of pressure to drill down on value. Buyers don't necessarily want to pay pre-pandemic prices for properties in a potentially fluctuating market, while sellers are loath to slash their prices before we understand the future impacts of COVID-19, and while their buyer pool is limited to only those willing to venture out of quarantine. I really like that because that really paints the picture of what's going on. I mean, I know the clients that I have that are looking out, of course they're looking for a deal. You think you're going to go out and look for something that you could have bought 3 months ago? Hell no, right? But here's the thing. Like, the sellers, because they're not in a tight position, they don't have any reason to sacrifice. In fact, they'll rather pull their listing off, and that's what we saw even in last month's numbers. The article continues. If our experience is indicative of any broader trends, and based on what I'm hearing from colleagues, it would seem that it is. Okay, so there you go. She's doing it too. Right? We're both doing it. But this is my bold section that I wanted to grab from this article. Buyers right now seem to be a mixed bag of deal hunters and those simply keen to take advantage of less competition. Multiple offer situations are still happening, and by and large, houses are fetching their price. So while pretty much all facets of life as we know it have changed in the face of COVID-19, Toronto's housing market inventory problem is somehow immune. And this immunity, by the way, we've talked about in the past, the numbers to back this up is our months of inventory not changing, right? And that'll be a really important picture for us to keep an eye on in the coming week or two. Actually, I think it'll be this week we're going to start to see that. But until we see those numbers, this is kind of what everyone is talking about. This is what the industry is feeling. So the way that this kind of works in our industry is you kind of feel what's going on and then you see what happened. Like, the numbers come out, we're living this. We're doing this daily, every weekend. I'm putting in offers and I'm talking with people and I'm getting the feel. Even in the marketplace, I'm getting a feel from articles, right? But you don't know until it materializes in the form of numbers. So as those numbers come out, this is the feeling. And hopefully you guys are seeing what our industry is saying. And here's the thing, like, this article, yes, it was directed to the public, but the one that went through my office, that was simply designed to encourage the agents. That was not intended to be shared with you guys. So if that gives any more credibility, I would say, well, there you have it, right? So this is kind of what I'm seeing. I thought that was the most important thing for today to share with you. But that is not to say this next part is not important too. Because now what I want to talk about, we have a lot of landlords and a lot of investors listening to our content here on our podcast. And so I want to share with you what's been going on for rentals and rent rates. And the rentals they don't get the attention that the market does. Everyone is generally, I would say, for every 2 or 3 people informed about the marketplace, maybe one of them are informed about rentals. And a lot of it is because maybe, if you're renting and you've got something and you're not looking, fine. People who are invested in real estate, they own property, they tend to have more of an interest than someone who's just paying Mr. Smith over there for his unit, right? Like, there's not as much interest unless they're planning on purchasing in the market. So, but this is important as investors to know what our investment's doing. Now, you guys will recall we did an interview. I was talking with a gentleman who's listened to a lot of our podcasts but hasn't listened to Casey Wong's interview. Please go back, if you are an investor especially, listen to that interview. I asked him the question point blank, what percentage of your rent are you collecting? Because we've seen in past months, we were seeing that it was actually floating somewhere between 20 to 30% lower rent being collected. These were out of surveys from Vancouver, these were out of surveys from the States, and there was opinion pieces coming out of Ontario. That's kind of what we had in front of us. But this article actually is starting to it actually surprised me. I'll be honest with you. There's no way I wasn't going to mention to this our listener. So here you go. New data shows that tenants with lower incomes were more reliable than their higher paid counterparts. That's cool, by the way, but there's an explanation we're going to get to in a minute for that, but that's not the coolest part. Well over 80% of residential tenants in Canada paid their rent in May, and that figure could climb, it could go up to 90% as more rents are being collected in installments during the COVID-19 pandemic, right? So we've collected 80, but now people are paying installments. Like, these are high numbers, right? Like 9 out of 10 people paying their rent. Like, these are surprisingly high. The figures come as a surprise to some economists who feared that the severe rise in unemployment numbers that hit near March's end due to coronavirus and continued through April. This is the thing, guys. Like, if people aren't working, if people are actually getting really screwed, then you would have people being legally allowed to withholding rent. But for some reason, they're not. So obviously, they're in a position to be able to pay. Could it be that the programs that have been put in place are sufficient? No different than people are not defaulting on credit cards. You know, they're not spending as much as well, right? Like, this needs to be factored in. Your disposable income is not as high. Your disposable expenses are not as high. So this comes from our friend Benjamin Tal, and this is who they've actually used as their economist. Pretty big name in the real estate community as well. He speaks to us often. Quote, the expectation was that it would be 60% or something. I love how he says or something. It makes it way more official. I like the economist. It's a 60% or something. Who adds that May's numbers are looking even better than April's. Well, wait a minute. Aren't we losing jobs? Aren't things shutting down more and more? Why are the numbers looking better than they did in April? Like, they've improved. Likely because some renters were still waiting on the CERB installment last month. Economists were similarly surprised in April when 85% of tenants paid their rent in full or in part. Okay, 85% in April. And the numbers have gone up in May, despite calls for a rent strike by organizations like Keep Your Rent Toronto. Now, we've talked about this organization. It's a pretty cute little organization. They're informing tenants on their rights, which is great. Like, good on you. You know, someone needs to educate tenants. It's a good platform when you have no other resources. But they've put out these really intense campaigns, you know, the picketing on landlords' fences or lawns, and just it's getting a little crazy. And everyone knows about them. I mean, they're doing a good job. If they're seeking attention, it's definitely working. And they've got websites available that educate tenants on their legal rights and the steps to take and how to battle landlords and that kind of thing. So there's been a lot of pressure, right? Like, there's been quite a bit of pressure against the landlords, and yet somehow they're still collecting their rent. Tal says that renters in higher income brackets were responsible for more delinquencies than renters occupying lower income brackets, despite close to 85% of the 3 million job losses over the past 2 months occurring in low-paying occupations. Okay, wait a minute. So 3 million job losses in the low-paying occupations, yet the low-paying occupations are the ones paying more rent than you damn, you know. Oh, now I say damn, now everyone's just like holding their breath. Who is it? Who's he gonna kill? I should just not say anything and just move on from there. I'm just gonna move on from there. Let's not make any enemies at this early in the morning. All right, but here's the thing, right? Like, he gives us an explanation as to why that is, and I really like it. This is my highlight of this article. 2 likely reasons why the demographic is paying rent more reliably. They are receiving CERB and enjoying rent control protections in their current accommodations. He speculates that those tenants don't want to compromise their tenancy by not paying rent, as landlords will jump at the opportunity when possible to evict and collect market rates on those apartments. Tal also explains the healthy numbers to repeat in June, since CERB will still be available and we're more likely to see job gains in the coming month. Wow, that is packed with stuff. Okay, and I actually have a real world example of that. That is so true. I have some friends early on when I started in real estate. Actually, they've been in their rental for years now, and they're paying. It's a 1 bedroom and a den in downtown Toronto, like entertainment district, and I believe their rents are like $1,700 or something. And so they are able to purchase a property, but like at rates like that, why leave? And so I was actually talking to them last week. Their family friend, in fact, the lady was one of our bridesmaids, and so we're very close with them. And they said to us, like, as soon as the first of the month hits, we send our rent. Like, we don't want to have a conversation with our landlord. We don't want them. They haven't actually increased rent recently either, so they don't want to ruffle any feathers. So I totally see this playing out as well. Like, if you were living for $1,700 downtown Toronto in a pretty spacious unit, would you mess that up by missing a rent payment? You know, because even though you've got protections in place, everyone else is paying rent. You know, there will come a time when you can be evicted. Don't ruffle any feathers. And this is what I see is happening. And this is what tells me that kind of lines up with what's being said here based on the statistics. And a final point as well, on the commercial side, they've said that they don't have the numbers for May, but in April, it was an 85 to 90% rents were paid. So yes, we see articles, people not able to pay their rent, and there's all these we hear a lot of doom and gloom news. So that number actually comes as a surprise to me as well. If 85 to 90%, well, it's no wonder landlords are like, well, I'm not gonna make any accommodations because like all of my friends who have commercial properties are collecting their rent. So why am I not? So get out of here. Obviously so I get that dilemma that's happening there as well, but very interesting numbers and numbers that are more recent and they seem to be improving. So before I kind of move on, who is stuck? Who is getting absolutely messed with right now, I would say, is people who have investment properties who do not have a tenant. That's who I'm seeing is actually the real losers right now. I'm finding there is massive competition for rentals because a lot of Airbnbs are coming on the market, right? Not to mention people who have left their rental units. Maybe they've decided, you know, I'm gonna move in with family. I can't afford to pay the rent. I'm just gonna go. So they've got the influx of rental units that are being listed. But then we also have a huge drop in demand. Immigration is down. Job-related travel is down, right? And even if you didn't have a rental right now, would you go out looking for a rental? Like just the idea of showings have dropped. So the amount of activity has dropped somewhere between 50 to 60%, but the number of listings is going up. So it's actually what's happening in the rental market is, I think, what everybody has been fearing would happen in the buying and selling market, in the ownership market, because that situation is a bad one, right? Your months of inventory, if you will, on rental units is going up very quickly as new supply comes on the market, but demand drops. That was the perfect storm, and it's still hitting the rental space. I've got a unit actually right now that's listed for tenants that have owned it for a little while, and they're finally ready to put a tenant in there. And that building shares amenities with another one. And between the two, they've got over 15 rentals listed, and they're listed at a reasonable price, but they're downtown Toronto. And this weekend we had no showings. I've had interest, I've had inquiries, but I haven't had anybody physically go and look at the property, even though there's no restrictions on viewings in that building. And yet I've got a listing that we just sold this weekend. I was telling you guys about last week on the east end of Toronto, a 2-bedroom, you know, not even a starter home. Like it was a little bit more expensive, a higher price point home. And I sold this thing. I had 2 offers come in on my first 3 showings, and we were able to sell it in the first weekend. Very different pictures between the rentals market and between the buy and sell market. Anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Very interesting stuff. I hope you guys are getting value. If you like the way this format is, let me know in the comments. Like, give me a little thumbs up. Like, is this the way we want to do this? Because I think, like, really, if there's value that I can add to the news, it's what I'm seeing in our marketplace. And there you have it. So before I jump into my last point, which is talking about property taxes, I wanted to just quickly mention just a notable that I saw in an article that came out of the U.S. It came out from Powell, who's actually the Federal Reserve Chairman in the States. There was a quote, and apparently they were going to broadcast this thing on Sunday. And he actually said a full economic recovery may not be possible until a COVID-19 vaccine is available. This was his quote. For the economy to fully recover, that may have to wait until the arrival of vaccine. In the long run, and even in the medium run, you wouldn't want to bet against the American economy. The American economy will recover. This is what he said. And actually it says that if there is not a second wave outbreak, he expects the economy will start to rebound in the second half of the year. It's interesting because we've seen stock markets, go up and down. If you actually look at the charts for the stock market rebound, it does seem to have plateaued. Now, this morning, the futures are up, but if you just kind of map that out, you can see that we're not seeing a full recovery. We have seen a recovery, but not to its highs. So, Okay, let's transition. I just wanted to kind of give you guys a quick glimpse into what's going on in the economy, especially in the States, because the American economy has big impacts on us up here north of the border. So this comes from my friend, Mr. Pickle, out of the Toronto Sun. He's a columnist there, and the article reads, Toronto should reverse his property tax hike. Mr. Pickle is extremely hard on Mr. John Tory. He really gives our mayor a run for his money. And unfortunately for him, I'm going to be critical of this article because I think we need to get a full picture here. So I'm going to start it out here with us. What we're going to talk about here, by the way, is the possibility of a property tax decrease or increase, or how does that all work? Like, are we going to see change in our property tax? Because this is a big price point. It's the single biggest check, according to John Tory, in Toronto. The right time to keep a promise is all the time, but sometimes it's especially important. That's certainly true right now of Mayor John Tory's promise not to raise property taxes. Tory successfully campaigned on his promise twice, quote, lower taxes, was the slogan plastered up to the podium for a speech when he decreed property taxes as the, quote, single biggest check Toronto taxpayers were forced to write each year. Tory broke his promise by increasing the city building levy, a disguised property tax hike that made life even more expensive in the city. He doubled down this past December, and council agreed to increase the levy to 10.5% by 2025. So he's saying, you know what, like, yeah, you said no property taxes, but you're being a politician here. Come on now. And he highlights that we've seen job losses, right? So then he starts to kind of talk about the challenges in our economy. We saw 400,000 job losses in March. We've covered that before. Economists have warned that higher property taxes could deepen the economic contraction. Well, duh, right? Tory originally planned to extract $63 million out of taxpayers' pockets with his property tax increase this year. Torontonians couldn't afford this property tax hike before the COVID-19 crisis. They certainly can't afford it now. Like, I wouldn't disagree with this, right? Like, he's pointing the picture, like, he's pretty much saying, you weren't going to increase taxes. Now you are. We already couldn't afford it. I mean, you're already taking advantage of, when he didn't explain any increases there, but property values had increased, right? So naturally the city collected amount would increase as well. Same with the transfer tax, right? The municipal transfer tax in Toronto, with the number of transactions down 60%, their collection of taxes are down 60%. Like, these are big tax collection issues that they're facing. The mayor should, at the very least, rescind his property tax increase immediately. So therefore, the solution is, based on all those problems and helping the little guy, is to take back the property tax increase, like reduce the taxes. And I'm like, come on, man, like you're missing, like, he's totally missed it. Like, I get you're trying to defend, like, maybe he's trying to appeal to the reader, right? And that sounds great, like property tax. But in this moment, to decrease taxes when taxes have already, because of our economy, be severely decreased, do you think that's possible in a good sense? Not to mention that the city needs to keep a balanced budget, right? So what he wrote here, and we know better because of the articles that we've just read, but here we go. He says the federal government's Canada Emergency Response Benefit is paying out up to $2,000 per month. That doesn't cover the average cost of a $2,200 per month to rent a one-bedroom apartment in Toronto. Well, okay, so first issue with that, the tenants don't pay the property tax. The landlords do. So if the real issue is that the landlords aren't collecting enough from the tenants to pay the property tax, then maybe the solution is an assistance in the rent collection. You know, assuming that we're having issues with collecting rent, maybe we should have a government that steps up to take that. But then if we're collecting 80%, maybe that was the right call, right? Because who wants to be paying and reimbursing all of this rent, knowing we've got such a vast majority of Torontonians actually paying the rent? Maybe there's not as big a problem as we originally thought. Then the next thing he says here is about 30% of rent due April 1st was uncollected, according to CIBC economist Benjamin Tal, his estimates. So then he takes the same information we just used and points to the April numbers instead of the May numbers, which he would have if he has the information from the economist Benjamin Tal. This was available. The numbers are now 20%. They're actually improving. And so, like, it seems so scammy to me to point to these numbers. And, like, I get he's trying to prove a case, but come on, man. The coronavirus lockdown has impacted Toronto real estate investors in the short-term rental market as well. This is true. As of November 2019, Toronto has 21,000 Airbnb listings. Alex Dagg, the company's director of public policy in Canada, said that more than 60% of hosts rely on Airbnb income to keep them in their homes. Pretty funny, right? It sucks for you guys. Like, you weren't even supposed to be running an Airbnb, and here you are, 60% of you relying on it to keep your income for your home. Well, there you go. Chickens came to roost. Sorry, guys, but not sorry. Like, you should have played your cards. Like, if that was the plan, then this actually is a instant karma, in my opinion. So, like, the Airbnb situation, it hasn't been fully approved, and there's a process that will be in place, but until that happens, we're not supposed to be doing it. And it should only be, when it does happen, as part of your primary residence, which we all know that that's not what's happening. The fate of the housing market is unclear. What is clear is that Tories should not be tempting fate by threatening a bad situation with a burdensome tax increase. Toronto-based Veritas Investment Research Corporation President and CEO Anthony Scilipoti has suggested that if even 2% of housing stock is listed for sale, the housing market could crash. Okay, great. The commercial real estate market has been impacted too. Canada estimates that half of the independent restaurants have been closed their door, may never reopen again. Okay, so I get it. There's risks, right? Like, this is why some people have been sitting on the sidelines. Fine. But here's the quick reminder. Like, just because we're in a financial challenge doesn't change the difficulty that the city is in. We have two options. We've talked about this before. They can either increase the taxes, right? Or if they don't increase the taxes, then they need help from the feds and the province, specifically the province. That's who they've been asking help for. But then this is so funny. Like the funny thing that's happening is we are saying, you know what? We can't afford it. Save us, city. But then the city's like, well, we can't afford it. Save us, province. And then, like, let me ask you a question. Is the province going to be able to afford it? No, they're turning to Ottawa and saying, save us, Ottawa. So the reality is that only God can save us now. Thank God for drive-in churches. But I'm going to read an article that kind of shows that our province isn't in any better of a situation. Like, we're kind of like, oh yeah, the province can bail them out. But here's an article that came out of Financial Post. Heading into 1993, Saskatchewan was a leading candidate for a dubious honor, provincial bankruptcy. So we saw this in 93 in Saskatchewan. No province has defaulted on its debts since Alberta during the Great Depression, but Saskatchewan's borrowing had soared through the 80s, and its credit rating had been downgraded, making it harder to sell its bonds to investors. But Saskatchewan's fiscal salvation ultimately came from two sources, austerity and Ottawa. Canada has already plunged into one of the most severe recessions in its history. The unprecedented government response to the coronavirus crisis is cushioning the blow, but at the cost of increasing provincial debt burdens that were already heavy. Given Ottawa's lower debt costs and relatively vast amount of borrowing room, provincial eyes have again turned towards the federal government some kind of additional help, highlighting one of Canada's unspoken truths: the provinces are too big to fail. There it is. Provinces are looking to the federal government. The federal government's just giving everybody money, and they're printing it, right? Like, that's what's happening. But we're all looking for help. So then to look at Tory and say, oh, you're such a jerk because, like, you shouldn't be collecting from, like, it's such a short-sighted approach. Anyways, it's appealing to its readership. And now you've got the full picture, guys. Like, everybody is we're all in a pickle. I love that that's his name. It just lines up so perfect. We're all in a pickle here. So anyways, fun stuff to look at, things to keep in mind, guys. This week is going to be such an interesting week, because we're going to hopefully see mid-month reports, something coming out that tells us statistically what we've been feeling here in the market over the last little bit. So I hope you guys can tune in with us. Make sure you're following us. If you're not, leave us a review if you like our content on iTunes, and I will see you guys next time. I'll see you tomorrow morning with more. Take care and keep it real.